A Game of Thrones. I really do not know much about this franchise. I never read any of the books, even though I'd like to do so at some point. I watched a part of season 1 of the TV show, which I found entertaining but not earth-shattering. But I've heard a lot about the board game, and I've heard very good things, so I wanted to play it at some point. And every time I talk about this, it seems that everybody else in the world has played it already. So I do not know that a review is really necessary for this game, but I still thought that I would make a video about my experiences since I finally got to play the game after a long time that I wanted to play it. It is a game of political intrigue and military action, all things that I like very much, with a component of bidding and of resource management, many layers, many elements that go together in this game, all set in the world of the A Game of Thrones franchise. It is a game that I had a hard time playing, that is, I had a hard time finding an occasion to play because it really is a long game, it takes a long time to play, it cannot be played solitaire, and as far as I can tell, and it really requires 6 players. There are ways of playing it with less than 6 players, there are 6 clans in the game, and you pretty much need a player per clan for the game to really shine, for the game to be what the game is supposed to be. I never played it with less than 6 players. I talked to people who did, and they all tell me that it is not the same. The players that are not... the families not controlled by players are controlled by non-playing agents. This is not just the same level of intrigue, the same level of excitement. And so for me, with my busy lifestyle, with 2 little daughters, it is extremely hard to find the time where I can put in 6, 7, 8 hours in a row to set up the game, teach the game, and play it to its conclusion with other 5 people. Finally managed to do so. I managed to do that twice in the last week. I'm extremely happy. That also means that I only played the game twice. Take this as a first impression type of review. If you're the last person on earth that never played the game after me, then what you're going to see in this video is a little bit of an introduction to the core concepts in the game, a sort of mini tutorial, not detailed in any sense. I really want to give you a general sense of the concepts of the game, so that if you are that famous last person who never played the game, you get a better sense of how the game flows and how the game works and what the main ideas behind the design are. If you already know the game by heart, then you can skip to the conclusions if you're interested in knowing what I think about the game, which is very positive things. Let's get started, because this is a game that has a lot of concepts to cover, even in just a short intro to the main concepts. This is the board representing the land that the players will fight over, and also here you have tracks that are used to record information during the game. There are 6 families represented in the game, 6 clans. The Stark, which start up there, so they only have to worry about moving south. They do not have to worry about being surrounded. The Greyjoy start here, in this island, and their power is heavily sea-based. The Lannister, which are here, are pretty much in the middle of the fray, really. They're surrounded by enemies in all directions. It's a tricky position to be in. Here we have the Tyrell, and here we have the Martell. These are good for beginners because they are not immediate in the middle of the action, especially this player here. They have some time to establish their power, to consolidate their position before they really start having problems with people that are neighbors of them but not acting like nice neighbors. And here we have the Baratheon. They start from there. They're in a good position because close to them are some very profitable locations to control, but that also means that sooner or later in the game, very often sooner rather than later, people will try to steal control of those locations from them. A confrontation between the Baratheon and the Lannister is likely to happen at some point. So these are the 6 families. Each player will use military pieces. There are 4 types of military units that will be deployed on the board, and these are represented by these pretty nice looking pieces. You have infantry, cavalry, ships, and siege engines. The combat power of each piece is respectively 1, 2, 1, and the siege engine is very special because it has a combat power of 4 when attacking a castle or a stronghold, and 0 in all other circumstances, that is, when fighting in the wilderness or when defending. Also, these units all have a stacking cost of 1. So independent from the power, each piece is a single point, a single unit against stacking values. The units during the game will be deployed on the board, moved around, the new units are recruited, and the game works pretty much as, as any game that you ever played probably, and most likely most war games you play. Things move around and attack each other. Each player also uses tokens such as these ones. These are power tokens. They can be used to retain control of lands as you move away from a land and you do not leave units behind. Then you place a token there to indicate that control of that region is still there. That represents, I imagine, bureaucrats keeping control of the land for you. But these are also used as currency later in the game to bid for certain privileges. Extremely important element in the game are the orders, the order tokens. At the beginning of each turn, actually, before I get to the order tokens, at the beginning of each turn, players draw 3 random cards, 1 from each of these decks. These decks generate random events, and because of different sequence of random events game after game, you can expect huge replay value here. Some things are good, some things are bad, limitations and special rules that will affect the next turn. This is something that happens very commonly. Some of the times players are given certain advantages, they can make certain choices. Another important thing is that some of these cards have the icon of the wildlings. The wildlings are lurching in the north, always threatening to attack. There's a track there. Every time that an icon of the wildlings show up, you move the wildling token on that track. When it reaches the last space, the wildlings attack. There is a deck of cards that indicates what the wildlings do. When the wildlings attack, the players have to bid power tokens to meet the number printed on the track when the wildlings attack. If the wildlings are attacking because the token is at the last space of that track, then the power that the players collectively have to generate is 12. That's the number at the end of the track. There are also cards that may trigger an invasion of the wildlings earlier, and those early invasions are easier to beat because they have lower numbers. If the players bid collectively enough power tokens, they spend collectively enough power tokens, they win, and the card will explain the advantages that come from that. If the players do not defend effectively against the wildlings, then there are penalties to be paid, and those also are detailed on the card. Another important thing is that some of these cards of the random events may allow you also to bid on those 3 tracks. Those tracks will have tokens representing the families, and at any time in the game you are in a certain position in each of those tracks. That track is the Iron Throne. Being higher on the Iron Throne gives you the advantage that you can break ties in almost every tie in the game for yourself, and also you decide, in case other players have a tie, who goes first, who goes later, who gets a certain advantage and who doesn't. This can be pretty powerful, especially in mid-game and end-game. Early game doesn't seem to be all that crucial to me. Then you have the fiefdom, which represents military power. Being high on that track gives you an advantage because you can break ties in combat. The Iron Throne breaks all ties but combat. That only breaks combat ties, but that means that you can win a combat just by matching the strength of the opponent. Also, you have a special token that you can flip once per turn, and it gives you the advantage of having a 1+1 in combat. The Raven track, that represents, if I understand correctly, power, influence. Being high on that track gives you special orders. That is, you get an advantage, you're able to use more order tokens during your turn and better order tokens. Now, at the beginning of each turn, so you flip the event cards, you resolve the events that may happen. To be high on those tracks, players bid power points secretly, then they reveal, then depending on how much people have bid, you adjust the tracks. So that's what happens or may happen at the beginning of the phase of a turn. Then players have to place orders on the board. Each player has a pool of tokens, such as these. They're placed face down secretly on the board, and you have to place one in each location where you have troops. Even if you don't really plan to do much, you still have to place things there. That's how the game works. So all players place those tokens randomly, and you can make deals. You may promise to the opponents, I'm gonna place this, that, and do this for you. And then maybe that's true, maybe you're going to do precisely that, and maybe you won't. After all players have placed their tokens, then actions are resolved. All tokens are flipped face up, and actions are resolved in turn order as established by the Iron Throne track. And these are, each player gets a nice screen, such as this one, which also contains a player aid. And these are what the tokens do. And the tokens are resolved in this order. First the raid order tokens, then the march orders, and then the consolidated power orders. These are orders that are not resolved in individual phases. They influence other actions. Raids are resolved first. When you do that, you remove this token and an opponent's raid, support, or consolidated power order token in an adjacent area. If you think that your opponent is going to play one of these tokens in an area adjacent to you, and you would like the opponent not to get the benefit of that token, then you play a raid, and those tokens are eliminated before they can be resolved, before the opponent can benefit from them. March order, this is when really the main action in the game happens, because they allow you to move units into adjacent areas. So in regions where I have a march order, for example, I have one in that, then I can move any and all units that I have in there to an adjacent area. This is also how you start combat, by moving into areas that have an enemy in it. At that point, combat is resolved immediately before the next march is resolved. But just to complete this part, after all marches and all battles have been resolved, then you have the consolidated power, which is the phase when players spend these tokens that they have placed on the board, and they spend them to generate power, that is, to generate power tokens for themselves. Battles, oh, those are fun. Battles may be affected by power tokens, by orders, indeed. If the defender placed a defend order in the region that is being attacked, then the defender gets the bonus printed on the counter. So the defense orders are orders that you place when you are thinking that you're going to get attacked. But this is very important. This is the support order. Support orders are placed in area that you think that during the action phase will be adjacent to areas where a fight will take place. That allows the units in the area with the support order to support a side in a battle in an adjacent area. Just to redo that. Here is the time for the Lannister to resolve a march order. They resolve this march order, they move this cavalry unit here, a battle will start. Now you total the power of the players, the powers that the players have involved in that battle. The Lannister have 2, because cavalry is 2 points of strength. The march may have a bonus, may even have a negative penalty. In this case it's 0, so it doesn't count, so we're still at 2. Then the Lannister have a power 3, 2 from cavalry, 1 from infantry, in an adjacent area that has a support order, so the Lannister decide to lend support to themselves. Now the Lannister have a power of 5 in there. As for the defenders, here we have a cavalry unit, which is a power of 2. The defender also has a defense token, which is a +1 in this case, so we are at 5 to 3. Once you have calculated the starting strength of the battle, in this case we are 5 against 3, each player will select a card. Each player has a hand of cards representing commanders or relevant characters that will affect the battle. Cards have numerical values and they also have effects. Each player has a different set of cards. The cards are very different from player to player. The cards are always public. You can always inspect the cards of an opponent, with the exception of after you have committed to play a card. Because what happens here, you look at your hand of cards, you choose one, and you commit it secretly. Suppose that the Lannisters have decided to play that card there, the opponent will also play a card secretly. And the only time when you cannot inspect the hand of your opponent is after the opponent played a card and before you play yours. Otherwise, well, you will look at the remaining cards and you would know what that card is. So secret and simultaneous selection of actions. Once both players have played a card there, have committed to a card, the cards are flipped, you add the numerical total of the card to the total of the player that played the card. Some cards may also have an effect described here that takes place during the battle. Other effects, such as those 3 sword icons, those are resolved after the battle. In this case, now the Lannister have a total of 8. Suppose that the other player played a card that gave them a power of 2, without other modifiers, without other effects. The Lannister have a higher total. The player with the higher total is the winner. The loser has to retreat. If the winner also has sword icons, each sword icon is actually a loss. It is a piece of the opponent which is destroyed in battle. If there aren't icons or effects of that type, losing a battle only means that you retreat. So actually battles are not as bloody as you have in other games, and honestly it's not as bloody as I would have expected from this game. There are a lot of other possible effects. For example, these icons, if you lose a battle and you have these icons, each one negates the effect of a sword, and a lot of these cards. Knowing what the cards do, knowing what the characters do is incredibly important. And as you can see, there is no random factor in the game. Once you play your card, however, you're committed to the good card, the card is discarded, you will not be able to get it back until you go through your entire hand. So you play enough battles that you're left with a single card. At that point, you play it and you get back your discard pile, you shuffle it, and you can use these cards again. With the exception of the last card that you do not get back, so you can never play the same card twice in a row. You don't get it back, it stays there. So you may also want to leave the last one, not your best one, because you want to get it back in your hand. Oh well, I guess this is pretty much the main idea here. I mean, this is really how it works. Recapitulating, during a turn, first you have random events generated by the cards. Players commit orders secretly. Players resolve orders in turn order. Raids first, marches, and then consolidate power. The turn is over, you repeat the procedure. But what are players fighting for? Well, they're fighting to control lands, to control as many as possible. And not all lands, not all areas on the board are equally profitable. Areas with a crown are better for harvesting power tokens. These areas grant you, the areas with the barrel grant you supplies. Those are very important. The amount of supplies that you control through the areas you control is recorded on that track, and that gives you the total number of armies that you can control. For example, if you have 3 supplies, then you can control an army of 3 and 3 armies of 2 units, and as many groups of a single unit as you want. So those are good to have. But what really is important is castles. You are trying to take control of castles. So the number of castles that you control is recorded on this track here. If you ever control 7 castles during the game, you win the game immediately. Otherwise, at the end of the game, which lasts 10 turns normally, at the end of the 10th turn, the player with the highest amount of castles is the winner. And of course, there are also ways to break ties. But this is a general idea. Scheme against your friends, create powerful armies, use your orders skillfully, use brutal power and diplomacy and also the deviousness to control as many castles as you can, and you will be the leader of the land here. You will win the game. And then there are many other small things that I didn't tell you about. Movement can happen overseas by using ships as transportation, that type of thing. Just many little details. Ports, very important for a variety of reasons. But let's start talking about the general sense of gameplay. How does gameplay works? Now that you know a little bit about how the game works mechanically. Gameplay is fantastic. I like this game enormously. The only thing that bothers me is how hard it is for me to play it. I don't know when I'll be able to put together a situation where I can comfortably play another game. It may be a long time. That really bugs me, that the game is hardwired in such a way that it's hard to play it for people with a schedule such as mine and family obligations such as mine. But that also goes to the credit of the game that makes me want to play it more and more. Because this really is a design to explore. I played the game from 2 different perspectives, that is from 2 different factions. Each faction plays vastly differently from the others due to the cards, due to the geographical locations, due to the neighbors that you have. Each time the game plays differently because of the random events generated by the event decks, and that can be crucial. The psychology of the players will change depending on the different group that you're playing in, and that is huge. You play against a player that is your neighbor and is a guy that holds a grudge even when it's not the best thing strategically for him to do. Then you play in a different way than if you're playing against other mix of opponents. All these factors really make each experience unique. I just had such incredibly different experiences with the game the 2 times that I played it that I can only imagine that this is bound to happen again, which is great. I love the multi-layered aspect of the design and the way in which all of the elements come together smoothly. From supplies to orders, the bluffing that comes with the orders, the bidding component, the harvesting power, the diplomatic aspect, the thinking that you have to do about the cards that you have in your hand and what the opponent has in his hand, and the entire mind reading thing. What is he going to play? What does he think I'm going to play? And how I'm going to try to be a step ahead of my opponent. There are variants that will allow you to introduce some random elements in the game, but I really like the game as is. That is pretty airtight. The only random element being in the order in which the event cards come out of the event decks, and other than that, all being planning, scheming, making deals, breaking deals, betraying your friends, that kind of thing. So how can you how do you expect the game to work? How would you expect the game to flow? The flow does go a little bit in ebbs and flows. It runs at some points and then it can be a little stagnant, in the sense that when the game goes around, actions can be somewhat dispersed. When an important battle is resolved in the north, the players in the south are not necessarily involved in that battle. It may take a little bit before the game goes back to them. And you have the sense, oh, who's next? Where are we? Nevertheless, there are a lot of things to do even for the players that are not immediately involved in each and single action, because players need to talk, need to have diplomacy, to make deals, to talk strategy. You may have a battle being resolved by two players in a corner and another two players leaving the room to go and talk shop somewhere else. You may have a lot of those things there. So the flow is not smooth, but the overall experience still is one that keeps most players engaged most of the time or all of the time, which is definitely good enough. I know that after 6 hours of playing this game, which is a reasonable time to play a game, I wasn't tired at all. I hadn't felt like 6 hours had gone by. Complexity of the game, this is not a game for beginners, definitely not a game for first-time gamers. Stick to your Ticket to Ride or Settlers of Catan if you're introducing new players to a game, but if players are willing to put some work in it, even casual players, I think they can get there. Most of the concepts are not really complicated. The game has similarities with diplomacy, so you may have players that are familiar with diplomacy. It shouldn't be too hard for them to cross over to this game here. I love it. I just like the complexity of the strategy, the overall strategy, the complexity of the tactics in trying to outsmart the opponent when putting together the right move, the surprises that come not from a roll of dice or from drawing a chit from a pool of chits, but surprises that come from human psychology. Support is key. Managing to get support in a battle, in many cases, maybe the most important thing in the battle, more than the cards that you play, more than other elements, may really be what makes the difference. And you have to place things strategically to create support for your own troops, from your own troops, and you have to be smart and polite and sneaky when you're trying to get support from the players. When I say polite, of course, it means you're just going to be polite for as long as it's useful to you. Don't hold grudges. If a player stabs you in the back, you may have to become the best friend of that player for the next couple of turns, because that's advantageous to you, and then at that point you get to stab that player in the back. You will not survive in this game if you fight against everybody every time. You probably will not survive in the game either if you trust everybody every time, and if you're always truthful to your promises. Reread The Prince by Machiavelli. The keys to win the Game of Thrones are contained there. I love this game. I can't wait to play it more. If you haven't played it yet, get on the boat, try to figure out a way to put together a Game of Thrones, because it's such a fine game. Very rewarding, very exciting, very engaging, involved, yes, but big payoff in terms of the richness and fun of the experience that comes out of the game. Big thumbs up from me.